Welcome back to another episode 75 of the Spittin Hoops podcast, your weekly, bi-weekly, whenever podcast about the NBA and quirky things about the NBA. Just like the pod that we're about to get into today, we're going to be breaking down a lot of trade terms. A lot of you guys out there, it's totally valid. You haven't read the collective bargaining agreement, but guess what? I have, and I will break it down for you in plain terms because I think there's a gap. I think you and I both agree there's kind of a gap between a general NBA discourse, which might not understand the value or what it means to, have a protected pick or be in the second apron. While I think a lot of NBA people are way too in the know, don't know how to communicate it in plain terms. So we're going to go over all that. Taylor Jenkins got fired. The NBA is popping. Anthony, how are you feeling?
Feeling good, man. Feeling great. Appreciate Max you coming on as a representative, a translator for the sort of scholarly side of the NBA CBA and for the more layman side. But doing well, man. Got a good fact for you for 75.
In the room?
Top 75 came out in 2021, I believe, but there's actually 76 players. Some people know this, some people don't. I don't know who the two are, but in 1996, in the top 50, there were 50. In 2021, there were 76. So 26 got added, not 25. The reason for that was there was a tie in that last vote. So I don't know who that was. Guessing based on who the players might have been on the edge of it. Was it Anthony Davis? Was
Dame
it Damian
Lillard.
Lillard? Right, exactly. So be very curious to see who kind of got tied in. But my fun fact for y'all is top 75 is 76.
Mm-hmm. Damn. Great fun fact. Do you remember when Klay Thompson didn't make it and Steph Curry gifted him a NBA 77 jersey
Oh, wow. That's
to,
awesome.
to troll him? And he,
That's
yeah, so
awesome.
kind
Wow.
of funny, honestly. But
There
and
was
a
a lot
lot
of
of
good
people at the time,
discourse.
yeah, and a lot
Yeah,
of people at the time were like 77. Why? It's because there were 76 people.
right.
Which shout out Curry for remembering that and being petty. He could have just made it 76 and no one would ask the question probably.
Yeah.
Um, Also, we'll have a deeper conversation about that 75 list, but it's not the top 75 players ever anymore.
It's definitely not.
Yeah.
No,
Like
it's
there,
definitely not.
no offense, there are just some people who are in like the top 50 who the NBA's just got so competitive. There's been so many seasons, so many MVPs, so many rings that I think some of those people have fallen out with all due respect.
Fully agree. Fully agree.
Now I'm on this kid. Best All-Star game in the last 6, 7 years, probably.
Sure. I love that idea.
The competition wasn't that good for that All-Star game, but like I thought it was really good. I thought that was the best one, the top 75 one.
It was fun. It was great. It was cool seeing LeBron hit the game winner.
You remember, did I already mentioned my idea on this podcast, so we should only do it every 25 years, right?
So we should do the All-Star game only once every 25
Yeah,
years.
yeah. Just for those big moments, like when they do the top 100, let's have
Mm.
the whole ceremony. Let's have the All-Star game, but maybe we don't need it every year. I don't know. Anyways, now I'm devolving.
Yeah, we could that's a good off-season topic. Maybe less frequently than annually or something like that for sure.
Yeah, definitely an off topic though. Tired conversation at this point.
Oh, most definitely. Well, Max, before we get into the terms, I wanted to share something with you that I started to share earlier this week. And this was prompted by a conversation I had a few weekends ago with a stranger that I met at a local watering hole. And after chatting for a little bit about basketball, things got a little bit heated, as they do when it comes to the GOAT debate. Now, me not being in probably my most of sound mind context, decided to really lock in and have this debate. And I kind of waited to see who this guy was going to pick. If he picked LeBron James, I would have argued for Michael Jordan. If he picked Michael Jordan, I would have argued for LeBron James. I just felt like arguing. Um, but he picked LeBron James. So
Agreed.
I went with Michael Jordan. And I'm curious to hear what you think too on this, but I feel like oftentimes there's two sort of segments to the debate. I mean, many, but part of it is the individual who is the best player, is in their rebounding, their defense, their scoring ability, the kind of technical side of the ball, their talent, their skill set, their leadership, their
Mhm.
individual accolades, their awards, things of that nature. In the argument that I was having with this guy, we didn't really talk about any of that because I think there's a lot of subjectivity to that. There's a lot of subjectivity to this other side, which we quickly got into, which was the 6-0 in the finals versus the 4-6 in the finals.
Mhm.
Um, and so for many people, part of that GOAT case over LeBron, which we talked about a few weeks ago, is that 6-0 finals. Part of LeBron's GOAT case, which a lot of people say prior to LeBron having lost in the first round a couple of times in the last couple of years was, well, isn't it more impressive that he didn't lose in the first round? Isn't it better to lose later on in the finals? But you can argue against that too and say, well, didn't LeBron faced easier competition on his way to the finals. So it wouldn't have been as hard for him to lose in the first round compared to a Michael Jordan who lost in the first round against the 86 Bulls, for example, or the, not the
86.
86 Celtics,
Yeah.
or the Bucks with Terry Cummings and Sidney Moncrief. Much better teams than would have been in the 2010s. But then you could have also argued, well, look at some of LeBron's teams; they were so bad, and he dragged them. And look at Michael Jordan's teams when he wasn't on them when he left, and the Bulls were still a pretty competitive team. And when LeBron James left his teams, they cratered. So in all this, I decided to come up with a formula um, that gives credit for advancing far into the postseason, but also gives credit for losing. And so I came up with this formula that essentially, if you miss the playoffs and you're an all star, mind you, so the way that this comes up is if we're going to look at who the GOAT is, we got to see how many points are able to accrue based on how many rounds you advance in the playoffs. But you can't count like a Gary Payton championship because for
Mhm.
me, he wasn't an all NBA or all star level player, so his impact wasn't quite there. So you have to be
Jeff Teague championship.
bingo bango manga. So the formula that I came up with, it's completely subjective, but curious what you think is if you don't make the playoffs, you lose a point. If you make the playoffs, you get two. Second round is 4. Conference finals appearance is 8. Finals appearance is 16. And a finals win is 32 points. But you get penalized for losses. So if you lose in the first round, you lose a point. If you lose in the second round, you lose 2. If you lose in the conference finals, you lose 4. And if you lose in the finals, you lose 8. So with handy dandy math, just a little plus minus, this comes out to if you miss the playoffs, you lose a point. If you have a first round exit, that's 2 points for the appearance, minus 1 point for the loss, 1 point. And the way the math works out, you get 4 points for a second round exit, 10 points for a conference finals exit, 22 points for a finals loss, and 62 points for a championship. So I kind of subjectively decided that let's think of a player that's been to the NBA finals twice. Jimmy Butler, for example. If you compare him to Isaiah Thomas has 2 rings. Jimmy Butler has 2 finals appearances. Historically speaking, I think we both agree that 2 rings is so much more valuable than 2 finals appearances. What I'm still waiting to do is come up with, and I'm using AI to try to help out with this, is factor in the difficulty of the path that both players had to go to get there, as well as how good their teams were or weren't and how much they impacted them. But I kind of threw all that together and I did the math. And according to the calculation I made, Michael Jordan finishes with 401 total points and LeBron James finishes with 415. I'm going to be very curious to see what happens when I sway these stats. I also threw Kareem in here, but the issue is he finishes with 508 total points. The issue that I have with this is in his last season when he won a championship, he was an all-star and he averaged 10 points per game.
Yeah,
So
and
I
that's the issue when with the guys a little bit further down the line. And I was thinking actually about this. This is probably a point against Michael Jordan,
sure.
or maybe for Michael Jordan, depending on how you look at it. But in this formula, how are you calculating these Wizards years?
Yeah.
And I
So
think there's also
right.
another aspect of like no flame to like I guess it's tough, but like um the 84 Bulls, right? The 84 Bulls, which was
Yeah,
MJ's first year.
yeah,
Um, I guess they are a playoff team, but that's a team with a losing record. Like
yeah.
I kind of think, no flame, but like when we're like, I don't know, maybe I'm giving them too much grace here, but
Mhm.
maybe we should take off some years that, like you weren't gonna win. Like I almost don't even want to give credit or discredit LeBron and MJ's rookie years. I don't like
Mhm.
I those are like washes to me. And also like I don't want to use MJ's Wizards years to define the good. So maybe that's a thought. But also right, I mean with this, it's not that big a deal. I mean with your formula, you're not like adding or subtracting really for the Wizards years, but that was just one thing I was thinking
Right.
about.
Exactly. So to your
Mhm.
point, you get 62 points for a finals win, and you lose 1 point if you miss the playoffs in a
It's
season
so
where you were
insane.
an all-star level player. Um, and I
But
think you and I both have this mentality. Yeah, yeah.
But if you were to take off MJ's rookie plus Wizards years, and then you took off LeBron's rookie year, it would bring the marginal. It's already a small marginal gap with your formula, but it would bring MJ closer to LeBron at least
It would.
in theory. Just
At
that was my first.
Right.
That was just one of my first thoughts. It's not that strong of a critique. I think this is a really good analysis, but
No, totally. I think that's helpful stuff too. And I think that would be really well shown for the argument as to perhaps a Tim Duncan championship in 2014. I mean, what he was an all-star, so that might not be the best example, but a finals appearance for a player that, you know, maybe they weren't an all-star. A Jason Kidd, for example, who was a championship, but
yeah,
he
it's a
wasn't
good
an
example.
all-star in that championship year. Um, so that might be a bit more nitty gritty. But to your point, there's definitely some kinks that I got to kind of iron out here. Um, but I will keep you posted as I continue to try to get this formula going.
Also, maybe I'm high horse here. I mean, this is more of a general thought than rather than your just thing. But I've been thinking about this in the GOAT debate. And I've been thinking about this with NBA history a lot of times. Like, I think I've decided that I'm pretty anti-comparison of um I don't love the comparisons between eras in terms of competition because like I think LeBron, sure, the East was weaker in certain years because the East was also
Mhm.
strong the first 7 years of LeBron's
Mhm.
career. It was quite strong. But then LeBron, like on the other side, LeBron had to play the best team in NBA history. So it's
Right.
like I think, and I guess this will be a fun part of checking back in with this formula, but because I wonder how you're going to rate that because I just mentally I can't give credit or discredit LeBron for not having played Bird and Isaiah and MJ or Magic or
Right.
Barkley, etc. But I can't give credit or discredit like LeBron for, or I can't give credit or discredit Jordan for not having played against, Steph, Kobe, like the Celtics, like Big Three Celtics, 73 and 9 Warriors, which,
Right.
you know, I would argue beat any, like, frankly, my true belief is I think the 73 and 9 Warriors would, uh, or the year after, sorry, the year after is the best team in history. Like, I straight up just think they romp the floor with every other team in NBA history. So it's like I'm just curious how you're going to rate that, and I think personally, I just struggle to do so. And so when I weigh the goat debate, I try to pull those things out. I think like I think competition within conference and outside of conference is really hard to measure, and I think that's why I'm curious to check in on this. But I think personally, when I do the goat debate, I try to not even think about that. I don't give credit for MJ for like because MJ no flame to Charles Barkley, but he's just not on the same level as like some of the guys LeBron's beaten, and no flame to like DeMar DeRozan. He's just not on the same level as guys that MJ's beaten. So
Right.
that's kind of tough.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And to that note, I tried a couple of things through ChatGPT that helped me define era difficulty rating. How good was a team in the season that they played based off of record, plus minus, points per game
Mhm.
differential, even like health of the players during the series. Um, but I got to find somebody that has a more advanced thing. I think I might use my brother.
Mhm.
So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how this goes and how much it factors. And also, um, if the numbers spit out that somebody had an easier path or their team was overpowered, how much does that impact the 62 points for that championship or the 22 points for the finals appearance?
Yeah,
Will it make it bigger? Will it make it less? Um,
yeah, like
no
no
doubt.
flame. to again, no flame to MJ, but like LeBron beating the 73-9 Warriors is like going to be really hard to compete with
Right.
if we're scaling, you know. So,
Right.
which is one of the reasons I think we put LeBron in the GOAT debate, despite having two less rings than MJ,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So yeah, I'm curious to see how this goes. By the way,
Yeah.
love both players. We're not here to pick sides.
No.
Love both. LeBron had a poor game last night against the Bulls, right?
Oh my
Um,
Lord.
but still watching him like what a great watch. What a thoroughly great. I can't believe he's still here. It's awesome, and he's great. Like to this day, he is tremendous to spectacle to watch offensively. Um,
So much fun.
so yeah,
Yeah.
love that. Also,
Can't wait.
Kawhi, that we'll talk about more NBA news, but like I was watching some Kawhi highlights and he was just giving me just MJ. Like it was literally like
Mm,
a silhouette MJ. Like I think Kawhi is a little underrated for that comparison, but like in terms of offensive bag, he's got really some like these two between the legs, quick pull up from mid, or like take you down to the post. I'm gonna bully you. I'm gonna come back out face up and take you to the rack. Like that was fun stuff. Anyways, but that's just where my mind's been going. I don't know. Um, yeah,
eight,
I'm
eight,
I'm excited.
eight. Yeah, 8-2 in their
Yeah,
last
we'll
two.
get to that. We'll get to that because I definitely do want to talk about them in the Western Conference picture, and which that's on the schedule for today. But that'll be at the end of the pod,
Yes, sir.
obviously. Do you have anything more on this Go stuff? We're gonna have to check back in on this. I'm invested now.
No, I mean, obviously, as these playoffs come along, depending on where how the Lakers do, this formula might change pretty quick. And if LeBron does something that is unbelievably unexpected, we might not really be having this conversation anymore. So it really depends what happens.
And LeBron wins another chip. It's gonna be hard for me to maintain my pyramid where it's at. We'll just say that.
Sir.
With that, let's
All
move
right.
on. This has been, I feel like we've teased this section
Yeah.
for a while. This is my bread and butter. I'm gonna
Yes,
make so
sir.
many, I'm gonna make so many breakout videos, but in this section, but I'm just gonna guide you through here. Just
Hell yeah.
terms, just this is the FAQ. Frequently asked questions about trades, cap space, certain cap space things, not too much. I don't want that we can really spend a lot of time on, but trades mostly and cap numbers that would affect trades. So like yeah, well, and we'll get into that. So I'll give you some examples for each of these things, and then I'm
Perfect.
for some of these I'm also going to give you future trade ideas,
Perfect.
concepts that we can move with forward. And Anthony,
Max, can
yeah,
I? Yeah, I was gonna say, can I tee you up?
yeah, I was about to say you could tee me up and you can ask me questions wherever here.
All right. So the first term that we have down is a protected pick. Max, what is a protected pick? Can you give us an example of protected pick? And let's talk about it.
100%. This is probably going to be one of our longest sections, by the way. There's a lot of intricacies here, and they're so applicable. Every team has traded, will trade, um, currently has another team's protected pick, whether it's unprotected or sorry, whether it's lottery protected, protected by a certain number, etc. But to start this, I mean, we need to start with unprotected picks. So an unprotected pick is just your first round pick. If I trade Stephen Curry for LeBron James and a unprotected pick, that pick, whatever year is designated for, will convey to me no matter what. So in 2029, if I trade right now for a 2029 unprotected first round pick, come 2029, I will get that team's pick, no questions asked. No questions asked.
Okay.
Um, so examples, historical examples. This is probably my favorite one. So um, a small concept here that we need to keep in mind is the idea of the Stipien rule. This is the old Cavaliers GM from the 1970s, and he would trade his unprotected picks 10 years down the line so that he could trade up in current drafts. And that gutted the Cavaliers franchise completely and to the point where the NBA stepped in and created this thing called the Stipien rule, which means you can't trade multiple unprotected picks in consecutive years. If I trade
Mm,
my unprotected pick for next year, I cannot then trade an unprotected pick for the year after. The way
okay.
teams get around this is swaps, which we'll get to later. So, an example of this, the reason the Stipien rule is in place is due to an unprotected pick trade where the Lakers traded Don Ford it was on 1980 draft night, if I remember correctly. They traded Don Ford in their 1980s pick for Butch Lee, who was on the Cavs. So the Cavs traded for that pick just outright. But the Cavs to do that gave an unprotected 1982 pick. That pick would go on to be James Worthy. So unprotected picks are extremely powerful. You have the fact that a team has no out, has no way of losing enough games to keep their pick, makes these picks extremely valuable in trades. These are the um, crown jewels of any trade. If you can get two unprotected picks, three unprotected picks, you know, one of those picks will likely hit to be a high lottery pick, which is why they're so valuable.
This is crazy. This makes me wonder how did the Lakers that's how the Lakers got James Worthy. I didn't know that. That's unbelievable. I'd never heard of Don Ford, so clearly this is a looking back in L. How did they get James Worthy? So they got James Worthy here. How did they get Magic Johnson?
So that I don't remember the specifics of that trade, but that was a trade with the Hornets, if I remember correctly. That was in they made that trade in 1976, and that pick that ended up being Jesus, Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson picked in 1979, right? So that pick just ended up conveying 3 years later. I don't remember exactly the protections on that pick and whatnot, which is why I just went with this Worthy example. And since Worthy is first overall pick too, and I think it's a good introduction to the Stippian rule, frankly. Like that was just why I went with this example.
Mm,
But yeah, Magic
yeah,
Johnson, similar situation, 1976 draft night. Lakers make a trade. 3 years later, the pick conveys and they get Magic Johnson. So
what a
yeah.
lucky franchise.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
smart.
frankly, like yeah, at this point in time, this guy in the Cavs was just not smart enough to realize that trading picks 10 years down the line is like probably a bad idea. So if you took advantage of him, you're a smart team at that point.
That's
He's
fair.
like it's like in fantasy. You just got to trade with the dumbest manager in the league. Like you're gonna win the trade. Like
Yeah, yeah, you're
um
right.
so yeah, that's the concept of unprotected pick. In the future, for example, like I think the concept that is applicable here is like if I'm the Rockets, I have a lot of picks upcoming from other teams that might be really good. It might be worth just floating out my own unprotected pick to a team. Um, and if you're the team acquiring said unprotected pick, um, if the Rockets things went really bad, you would get that
Yeah,
pick. And
right.
in most cases, it's possible the Rockets would be pretty good. So, you probably wouldn't have to trade that much to get that. So
That
that's
makes
just an
sense.
example.
Hmm.
But looking forward, I think the most applicable trades for unprotected picks, though, are superstar trades. Teams do not like giving unprotected picks.
Right. That's the only time. If you are dead set, you're a young team, you're going to be winning a lot. And in 5 years, the odds of you being a shit team are like slim to none. You'd have to have something catastrophic happen.
Like the Lakers, if they would, they would have traded unprotected 2030 picks for Luka. So,
Right, right. Yeah,
for example.
that's fair
Um,
enough.
So yeah,
All
that's
right.
that's example number one for unprotected picks. But I guess
Unprotected.
let's put that aside.
Okay.
Let's just revisit the concept of protected picks in general. So like let's say I make a trade. This pick is protected from this pick to this pick. That would mean if it falls from that range of picks, I would retain my pick. So if I have a pick that is top 10 protected, and then that um if I trade away my own pick, but it is top 10 protected, if that pick falls between 1 through 10, I will retain that draft pick, despite having traded away the pick at some point. Um, so that's
Can you give an
the
example?
yes, absolutely. So I think for this the top 10 protected one, I think an example here that's really applicable is the Nets. They got Gerald Wallace in 2011 from Portland in exchange for a first round pick that was top three protected.
Okay.
And if it was in the top three, obviously New Jersey would have kept the pick. But it
Mm,
conveyed outside of it. I believe it conveyed to seven. And Portland gets Dame Lillard. So very applicable. But we also do need to think about sometimes the picks don't convey. And so the teams have pre-written concepts of like, if this pick doesn't convey, here's the next step. So a lot of times with these protected picks, they'll remain protected for multiple years if they're not conveying. And a fun example of this that I found was the Pistons 2012 and the Bobcats. They make a trade. It's Corey Maggette for Ben Gordon and a protected pick. The Pistons are not in the lottery in 2013. Um, uh, Sorry. If the Pistons had not been in the lottery in 2013, then Charlotte would have got Detroit's 2013 pick. But the Pistons were in the lottery. Detroit kept their pick, and we moved forward to the next condition. And the next condition was it would be a top seven protected pick in 2014. The Pistons were terrible, but they were not top seven team. They
Mm.
gave their pick to Pistons that year after, to the Hornets that year after, and they picked Noah Vonleh. So, there's that, but that gave the Hornets a top 10 pick despite having not gotten the pick the year before. So that's just to draw a picture of like usually there's multiple steps. Even if I don't convey the pick in year one, or even if I keep the pick in year one, keeping the pick in year one might result in that pick remaining lottery protector or something in the future. So yeah.
What if what if your team so a lot of this sounds like lottery based, right? Like you won't find out until the ball stops spinning and it comes out.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And my favorite example actually of this is the Grizzlies in 1997 traded with um, Pistons uh, a protected pick, a weirdly protected pick, and they actually had the right to give the Pistons their pick at any point. Memphis did. They had the right to give up their pick at any point in a 5 year span between 1998 and 2002. But then if they did not do it within that 5 year span in 2003, their pick would become top one protected going to the Pistons, right? They never chose to convey their picks from 1998 to 2002. So they are just rolling the dice. And then 2003, it became top one protected on lottery night. On lottery night 2003, that's LeBron James' lottery.
Wow.
The final two ball selections were not the Pistons lottery ball and the Cavaliers lottery ball. It was the Grizzlies lottery ball and the Cavaliers lottery ball. So if the Grizzlies had won that, they would have LeBron James. Instead, they finished second. Darko Milicic goes to the Pistons.
Oh my Lord.
That is my favorite example of this stuff. So, by the way,
Wow.
horrible management to not give up a first round pick between 1998 and 2002 because you knew this was coming. But this 2003 pick was effectively unprotected. But very truly, I mean, that top one protection ended up being very valuable for Memphis at some point. Like they almost have a chance to get LeBron James, but that's what happens. So, anyways, that's kind of the idea. And actually, another thing is from 1998 to 2003, those picks were all top 18 protected. Um, and so the Grizzlies they were just bad for that whole span, basically. So they always kept their pick. Or if it was in the top 18, they would have the option whether they wanted to give up the pick or keep it. They kept it every year. And so, anyways, that's how it happened. Yeah, that's a fun
So
example that really gets into the weeds and combining multiple concepts of conditions and trades plus protections plus top one protections, etc. But
so 2003 was the final year that it could happen, right?
I believe if they had gotten the first overall pick, they would have had to then give up an unprotected 2004 pick. But I
But
might need to
besides
double check
that,
that. Yeah, like if they had gotten LeBron James, then in 2004 they give their pick to the Pistons, if I remember correctly. But like
so
that
they were just
would
hope they were just hoping
I mean,
at that
frankly,
point.
they thought they were going to be good. Like that's why they didn't convey their pick in 2002. They decided to use their pick, knowing that in 2003 this was coming. They decided to keep their pick 2002 because they could have stopped this madness at any point by just giving the Pistons. You know,
Huh.
so
Okay.
that's
Interesting.
the and that trade combines like multiple concepts again. Like it's not often where you see teams right in like for these 5 year spans, if the pick is within the top 1 to 18 range, I can pick whether to convey it to you or not.
Hmm.
Like that's kind of crazy. But just on the protection idea, once we get to 2003, that pick is top one protected. And like Memphis is literally between either getting LeBron James or they won't have a first round pick. So kind of funny.
So the Grizzlies got Otis Thorpe and the Pistons ended up getting Darko Milicic in the long term.
Yes. And I mean, the better way to look at it is the Pistons had the ability to pick just about anyone, and they decided to pick Darko. Yeah.
Wild.
because yeah, because if you look at it that way, Otis Thor for Dark Code doesn't feel that bad. But like,
Yeah. Right,
and
right, right.
and and if you're Memphis, you gave up the ability to draft Dwayne Wade for Otis
Yeah.
Thor. That's the better
Right.
way to look at it, right?
Right, 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 right,
So,
right.
anyways, that's
Interesting. Okay.
protected picks. So that's and finally, my last thing on the protected picks again this is on this section, but there's a lot of protected picks that don't convey. So, like if I trade a pick and it's lottery protected for 5 years, what happens after those 5 years? So truly, it just depends.
Hmm.
Like I said before, teams just write in these clauses when they make the trades, and many of these trades after a certain set of years they become second round picks. So, for example, Washington, to facilitate the Wall for Westbrook trade a few years back, they sent a protected pick that was really long term protected. It was like lottery protected, and top 10 protected, and top six protected, to Houston. Houston then traded that pick to New York at some point. And so now New York actually, still to this day, holds top six protected rights over the Wizards pick until next year. But if New York does not get a Wizards first round pick this year or next year, which they won't get it this year, they might get it next year. At the end of next year, if they have now gotten a first round pick from this trade, they will get two second round picks from Washington,
No matter what.
no matter. But it'll be
Like
second
there's
again. It'll be
yeah.
second rounders, and it'll be predetermined second rounders. Um, so like the predetermined second rounders are the Washington's own 2026 second rounder and the 2027 their own 2027 second rounder. So yeah. So
Got
these are
you.
predetermined. And so now Washington, the other thing is now Washington can't trade that second rounder. It's already on the back end, it's already implied in the trade.
Got you.
I
Okay.
mean, and teams get creative because you could trade a second rounder and say, if the Knicks don't get the second rounder, you get it. But now we're really in it. Like that's just like really teams can do that. You see it sometimes, but yeah.
Interesting. For the purposes of this initial introduction, this is starting to make more sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So is it
And I think this is the basis of all trades. All trades
ki-
in the NBA, there's value. Very rarely do we see one for one trades and
right?
protections. And these are all, they create nuance rather than just a first round pick or second round pick. Creates nuance behind these deals. And I think that's why it's important to cover first.
Can you help me and maybe some of the listeners understand something for this upcoming season?
Hmm.
As I understand it, the 76ers have a top six protected pick that could
Yeah.
convey to OKC. Okay, so what would that look like in either direction?
So on lottery night,
Yeah,
if the pick is seventh,
yeah.
Oklahoma City gets it.
Okay.
Or later. If it's seventh through
Or
third,
on. Yeah.
Oklahoma City gets it. If it falls in the top six, Philadelphia will keep it. Now, I haven't looked at that trade specifically, but I assume if Philadelphia keeps this year's pick, they will probably owe next year's pick to OKC, depending on what the implications are in the trade. It's also
It will.
possible that
Mm,
if Philly keeps this pick, that they're only giving up second rounders to the Thunder after this, just like the Wizards in the example I gave you. But I just don't know in that specific circumstance. But so that's why lottery night will literally decide that,
interesting.
which is
All right.
fascinating, which is
That is
electric, by the way,
that is fascinating.
because on the spectrum could range from the Sixers having the first overall pick to the Sixers not having a first round pick.
And maybe this is a tangent, but the it's only the top four worst teams in the NBA now have a shot at the first overall pick. Is that correct? Did that
No,
update?
no, every team has a shot
Every
still.
team does
Yeah,
still.
the way it works, the lottery, it's really you have to look at it as there's four finalists who
Yeah.
share, and you have that's kind of how like the top four, you have odds to get in the top four, and once you're in the top four, it's just random from there. Um, that's kind of how you need to look at it.
Okay.
Um, so
That was to
like
decrease tanking, right?
yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
decreasing. Yeah, 100%. But so the way when you look at it as like a top four, so like the furthest someone could drop in theory is if they're first overall, they could only drop to fifth.
Okay.
So that's why you need to think about it as a top four. That's why. Because that's the way it literally works. It's the four teams get picked in the final four. They all split 25% odds to get the first overall pick from there. So if I'm the Wizards and I have the first overall pick, the four teams move into the top four, I move into fifth. That's the furthest I can go. No other team can bunny hop me from
And if you're the second worst team, the lowest you can go is sixth.
sixth. 100% exactly. And that would be if
Interesting.
teams 13, 12, 11, and 10 all jump to the top four, which would be very unlikely. But
Yeah.
I actually really
Okay.
like this lottery system, actually. Pretty pro.
Hmm.
But that's kind of the way it works. And so it actually, yeah. But funnily enough, we haven't seen that many trades that protect top fours just because in theory, I mean, protecting top four would make sense a little bit more so than a lot of the other circumstances we see. But just player wise, we don't usually see four really good players in the draft.
Mhm.
So that's why either you'll see teams extend the protections further one way or make a top one protect. So,
All right. Very good.
so
Um,
that was protected picks. That was again, that was our longest section for sure. We're not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very, very interesting. We're looking forward to seeing how this continues. All right. So the next one that I'm going to toss out to you is, can you explain what a cap hit is?
Yeah. So your cap hit is just the amount of money that you cost against the salary for that year. So
Oh,
just
okay.
and I think that's the way I'm going to introduce the concept. We have concepts of unguaranteed contracts, so I'll get to in a bit. But in general, if you are on the salary cap, but for a guaranteed contract on the first day of the season, that team against the cap, you count for that amount against the cap no matter what. So
Hmm.
pretty much. Um, if I have John Wall who's making $40 million and I cut him on the first day of the season after the first game, just cut him, waive him. I'll need to pay him $40 million, and it'll cost $40 million against my cap. Um,
Okay.
so a cap hit also it sounds simple. It's just like it's the cost against the cap for that player that year. But
Hmm.
as we'll get to later, that doesn't always mean their salary. Players with a certain amount of service can make like $3 million, but their cap hit will only be 2 million. It's like stuff like that. So you get some quirky stuff like that, but we'll get to those concepts later. I think um, the main thing here is there's unguaranteed contracts as well. So like Al Horford in 2022 was only guaranteed for 14 million. So his salary was 26. So if he played the whole season, he would make a total of 26 million. But if he got cut on the first day of the league year, then the Celtics would owe him 14 million and he would make 14 million, but they wouldn't owe him anything further than that. So I think that's kind of the most important stuff. And that I think cap hit and guaranteed contracts kind of go together. In the NBA, we always like to think that all contracts are guaranteed, and that's actually just not the case. So that is like
Mm,
really important. But usually the non-guaranteed part comes in the forms of options, which is like if the team option is like a team can choose to pick up your contract, a player option, the player can choose to pick up their contract for another year. But there are unguaranteed contracts. And so the reason cap hits are important to conceptualize is that the player could not be on your team and you could be costing against the cap. If I sign a player to a max contract tomorrow, a guaranteed max contract, and waive him the day after, on my balance sheet, his salary will still count every single year for that contract I signed him for. So that's just kind of why it's important. That's why you sometimes see teams play games with like waiving people, or as we'll get to later, getting around the aprons. Um, uh, and sometimes you'll see people on the payroll for multiple years. Like sometimes teams will come to agreements to cut a player if they keep him on the payroll for like 5 years. Um, like if you remember, Luol Deng was like waived and stretched, and he was still on payrolls up until a few years ago. So despite
mm,
having been out of the NBA for many years. So I just think the concept of a cap hit, like when you're thinking about salary cap, you need to think about the NBA as like a spreadsheet a little bit,
right.
because just because you don't have a guy on your bench doesn't mean he might not be costing you money. You
Right.
know?
He's effectively, you're paying for him.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
100%.
contract. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
what are some examples of, okay, so Horford in 2022
Mhm.
had a 14 million guarantee despite his salary being 26.5. What were the things that he would have needed to get all that guaranteed money?
So
Or
in the
for
NBA,
example, yeah.
you just gotta play. In the NBA, for a lot of this shit, you just gotta play. And if you just
Game.
play the
I
game,
see.
yeah. And so the game checks that he just would have gotten, that's now we're really getting into intricacies, but like every time he would have gotten money, like during the season he was paid his salary, it would have been like a fraction of actually 26 million. So just
Mm,
as he played the season, he would be making money up until 26 million. And if he got cut before he made 14 million, the Celtics would instantly pay him the difference.
got you.
Yeah. But the difference to 14 million. Now, After 14 million, let's say he had played enough to make $16.5 million. We're at game 50. If he got cut at that point, now his cap hit is 16.5 million, but it's not 26.5
Okay.
million. And so that's
Right.
also an important concept when we're thinking about luxury tax payments. So like if you cut a guy after you've paid him 16 and a half, your luxury tax payment is going to be lower than if you play him the whole season and then and then he costed you 26 and a half. So anyways, I think that's a little bit in the weeds. I guess it does kind of take us into another concept, which is the luxury cap really quick, which is
Sure.
just, the salary cap of the NBA, your total salaries the total cap hits. Actually, yes, now we're the total cap hits that you have for a certain year. The
Yeah.
maximum in theory is 140 million. There are ways to go over this by re-signing players, rookie contracts, etc. But after 140 million, if you're able to get so many salaries that you have 170 million, from there you will pay a certain amount of tax
Wait, sorry.
on each salary.
Before you go on,
Yeah,
what happens between the 140 and the 170 mark? Like 160, what's
nothing.
happening?
You're just over the cap, and so when you're over the cap, you cannot add players. You can't sign free agents unless it's through an exception. Um, I can't re-sign a player if he doesn't have bird rights, which we'll get to later. Uh, Stuff like that. But when
Okay.
you're under the cap, like you just kind of need to think of the cap as like, you know,
Yeah.
we have a maximum budget. Maximum budget is 140 million.
Yeah.
There are ways to go over the budget, but if you go over the budget all the way up until 170 million, from there we're going to start taxing.
Hmm.
I think that's kind of the best way to look at it. You get
Okay.
the limitations that you have while you're in the tax versus being over just 140 million, which is a salary cap, are the same limitations outside of the tax payments. But yeah, so that's kind of the way to look at it. And you can't. The only ways to go over the cap are re-signing your players with bird rights or exceptions. Um, and again, these are concepts we'll get to later. But so it's actually quite hard. Your team has to be pretty good to go over the cap, like frankly.
Okay.
So yeah.
So what happens if you've gone over the cap and now you've gone over that luxury tax threshold? Where are
So
you now?
for every dollar that you're over the luxury tax, your owner is going to need to pay a certain dollar amount to the league. I don't know exactly what the total amount is because there's also thresholds. Like it gets worse and worse and worse. Like the
Mm,
first tax is like 25%, the next tax is 50%, then and
sure.
then if you do this, we'll get to this later. If you're in the second apron for multiple years, for example, your tax could be almost 100% that second year.
Wow.
Um, and that was a concept before called the repeater tax. The issue is with the repeater tax, the Golden State Warriors just didn't care and they just paid it every year. Because the ownership was making so much money. So that's why the aprons kind of came to exist. But outside of that, that's kind of how the luxury tax still works, where like at a certain threshold, we pay 25% for every dollar you're spending. At a certain threshold, you pay 50% on top of every dollar you're spending, etc. But
Okay.
those tax numbers, by the way, do not count against the cap. They do not further your they don't further your debt over the cap, etc. These are just
Right.
payments the owner has to make to the NBA.
Gotcha.
It's kind of a deterrent for the owners, frankly.
Yeah. Unless you got money.
Yeah, so that's kind of how the luxury tax works. And so you have teams that avoid this like the plague. The Bulls, they use this as an excuse to never go over the luxury tax. So I kind of have thoughts that if you're an owner and you own a team that's worth $6 billion, I don't know if paying 10 million in luxury tax penalties versus paying zero is that big a deal.
Hmm.
But it's kind of a built-in way owners have an excuse. Oh, this
Gotcha.
player, re-signing this guy for 6 million. It's not really just 6 million because I have to pay him. I have to pay the NBA 10 million.
On
Like
top of it. Hmm.
yeah. So like owners kind of get a built-in excuse with these luxury tax things. Whether they can afford it or not is another discussion. But
Different discussion for a different time.
yeah.
All right.
So but I think those are really important concepts right there. Yeah. Luxury tax,
Beautiful.
guaranteed, non-guaranteed, and cap hits. Like these are the bases of this NBA salary cap, which means it's the basis for trades, all trades. So
Beautiful. Well, I guess let's keep going. So luxury tax is that 170 million level.
yeah.
What's the next sort of barrier or issue that happens if you keep
That's
spending?
so that's 178. And by the way, these numbers we're using are for the 2024-25 season. These numbers will go up 10% next year. by the way. The
Wow.
salary cap goes up 10%. All these numbers are going to go up 10% because the NBA is growing.
Right.
And these numbers are also set by the splits. They have a formula that they do, but basically, I believe the NBA to and the ownership to players split is like 48% to 52% or something like that. And so the salary cap is set based off the income of the NBA and that split. So they
Mm.
have a formula how they do it, but that's kind of how it's set up. Um,
And just as a quick aside, this is why if you sign a guy whose salary is not increasing very much every year, you're actually getting a bargain deal and paying him less against how much
Potentially, yeah,
potentially. Yeah.
potentially, yeah, yeah. Like if you have a contract that's only increasing by 2%,
Right.
um, like if that player maintains their value on a league wide scale for the next 2 3 years,
Right.
that contract is worth less in a good way for you than it was when you first signed it, 100%.
Right.
And
Right.
frankly, it's rare to see contracts that increase by 10% or more. So these
Right.
increases are going to be kind of fascinating. That
Interesting.
said, apron number one, yeah, and so I painted the visual that like this is $0. The
Yeah.
salary cap is 140,
Yeah.
and then luxury tax is 170.
Yeah.
The next barrier, again, this is if you're over the salary cap. It's very difficult to do, but once you're over the salary cap, if you somehow have 178 million in total cap hits on your team,
Hmm.
you face even stricter rules. You don't get to use the mid-level exception. You don't get to make trades that have multiple players depending on what the trade is. And you also can't buy, like, you can't send out cash considerations. And the reason this is applicable in trades is really on draft day. A lot of teams like trading cash considerations for late second rounders if there's a guy that they like on the board and the other team doesn't have any use for the second rounder. So, for example, the Warriors last offseason, since they went under the first apron for a while in a good way, by not re-signing Klay Thompson and Chris Paul, they were able to buy the Quinton Post pick with cash considerations.
Mm.
So
Okay. Can you one question I had was, can you elaborate on what non-taxpayer mid-level exception? Who is a player that is considered a mid-level exception?
yeah, Dante DiVincenzo
Okay.
signed with the Warriors a few years back on the mid-level exception, for example, if I remember correctly. Or no, he signed with the Knicks on the mid-level exception, if I remember correctly, which is around 9
Hmm.
million. It'll go up to 10 million. It'll go up to 11 million. Non-taxpayer mid-level exception means you're not in the luxury tax, but you are over the salary cap. So luxury tax 170 million and above,
Yeah.
salary cap 140 and under. So if you're in that $30 million little branch, the NBA is giving you a lifeline to still improve your team and add salary, despite not otherwise being able to do so because you're over the salary cap.
So if you're above the first apron, you do not get that lifeline.
Exactly, because you're a taxpayer.
Okay.
That's why it's called
Right.
the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Now, there is a mid-level exception that is for everyone, but that is around 5 million.
Gotcha.
And when
First
you're in this,
apron, second apron.
yeah, first apron. Yeah, just first apron. Once you're in the second
Oh,
apron, that 5 million exception goes away, which is a perfect segue into the second apron because the second apron
okay.
at 188 million, which is around 10 million more than the first apron. So again, if you're at 188 million total cap hits on your team or 188
Hmm.
million or above, you no longer again can send cash and trades, but there's worse implications where if you stay in that realm for multiple years, you will now owe your pick, or your pick will move to 30th in the draft 7 years from that point,
Sorry,
which is
say that
really,
again.
if you're a second A team for multiple years, 7 years from that point, you will owe your first round pick will become the 30th overall pick in the draft,
No matter what.
no matter what.
So you got to be careful with who you're trading if they've
Mm-hmm.
been in the second apron for how many years in a row is it? Is it 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Is it 3 years in a row? Then
Two
your
years?
pick
I think it might be
is
two
it's
years.
2 years.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at to trade with a team like the Celtics or the
Okay.
Suns, I better be careful because that pick, if it's way down the line, that might be the 30th overall pick.
It's actually worse than this.
Oh
You're
my
100%
Lord.
right. First of all, you're 100% right. It's actually worse than
Oh
this. So
no.
once you finish the season as a second apron team, your first round
Yes.
pick 7 years in the future is frozen. It's just considered frozen. You can't trade it, whatever. And if you end up as a first apron team or over the second apron, one of the next 4 years after that, that pick that was frozen instantly goes to 30. So it's like 2 years out of five, really. That's the way you need to look at
And if you have I mean, this is really the weeds, but if you attached an apron
it.
uh, thing here and or a spreadsheet. There are currently three teams that are in the second apron: the Suns, the Timberwolves, and the Celtics. So let's say all three of those teams happen to be in the second apron once more in the next 4 years. It's those teams are the 30th, 29th, and 28th picks automatically.
In theory, yes. So Phoenix
Interesting.
at the end of this year, their pick in what 2032 will be frozen. And if they finish again in the second apron, any of the next 4 years after that, that 2032 pick from Phoenix instantly becomes the last pick of that draft or last pick of that first round. So yeah, and if there's multiple teams, could happen with multiple picks. I think at that point they would do coin tosses like they do for other positions in the draft.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's really an important part. That second apron is really killer. You get no exceptions. You can't trade player, and also an important part, you can't combine salaries to take on more salary. I can't, if I'm in the second apron, I can't combine KD and Kevin Durant and go get guys who make slightly above that. Like I can't. Because there's also a margin for error when you're matching salaries. When you're under the first apron, you
Mhm.
can match salaries that are a slightly above your players or slightly under your players. Like they give you some margin. Once you're over the second apron, you can't do that at all. So that's another limitation of the second apron and why sometimes trades are really hard for those teams. Because if you're trading Grayson Allen and you're the Suns, you cannot take any more. You cannot take one more dollar than whatever Grayson Allen's salary is for that year, and you can't take
Wow.
on multiple players.
Wow. This is fascinating. Um,
Yeah,
I,
and
I,
it's
I
really killer. It's really a killer, frankly. I think
yeah,
if you're the thing is if you're the Celtics, you do the second apron. You don't care. Like
sure.
and frankly, the thing is if you're the Celtics, this offseason you can just trade Hauser and get under the second apron. So that's probably what's going to happen. Um, but
Mm,
like in theory, if you're that good, like you probably don't care. If you're that good and you don't have an easy out like trading Sam Hauser, you probably keep paying it. But if you're the Suns, they will not be a second apron team next year, 100%. And how are they going to do that? By trading Kevin Durant. So there you go.
gotcha. We'll see where he goes.
Yeah.
Um,
And one of the reasons this is just quick, one of the reasons the Phoenix Suns will trade Kevin Durant is because they've said they don't want to trade Devin Booker, and one of the few players in the NBA with a no trade clause is Bradley Beal. So both of
oh,
those guys make 50 million, for example, 60 million. That's
yeah.
basically your full salary cap. And if Kevin Durant's another 50 million on top of that, that basically takes you in the second apron with those three players. So the only guy of those three you could trade is really Kevin Durant.
Real
Um,
quick, let's
yeah,
talk about that no trade clause.
exactly. Yeah.
So there are two players in the league right now, to my understanding.
LeBron and Beal, is that correct?
Right, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, no trade clauses. You can negotiate in your contract. Most teams won't give it to you. When you are traded, if you decide, basically a team can agree to a trade, and you can say yes or no. And so usually because of that, the player is involved in those trade talks. But in theory, I mean, a team could just keep bringing you trade proposals, and you could keep saying, I don't waive my trade
Mm,
clause," and then that could happen. Um, but in practice, the way it happens, usually those players are the ones to facilitate their own trades. But once you're traded, you keep your no trade clause. The team that gets you still has to deal with you and your no trade clause. So that's why that it's very important and powerful tool, but it'll always kind of mitigate the amount that a team is willing to give up for a player.
interesting.
And another quick thing, no trade clauses can happen in other ways. So if I sign an extension 2 years down the line and a team wants to trade me before then, if I'm above a certain age or years of service, I will automatically get a no trade clause for like 2 years. That's really rare. Like that's really niche. That's like the Stephen Curry extension, for example. Um, like if I understand it correctly, like he technically kind of has a no trade clause for like the first year of like for the next year. But
Mm.
yeah,
Okay. Well, I'm just going to keep flowing where you're saying. So, can we talk about years of service?
Yeah, 100%. Actually, this is great. And this is going to take us into minimums and whatnot. So, years of service, just the amount of years you played, is the amount of days you've been on an NBA roster. Um, if you were injured, still counts against your years of service. Still counts. If you're in the G League, it does not, by the way.
Okay.
If you're in any other league, it does not. It's like the active amount of days you're on an NBA roster. You could be a cap hit and not be accruing years of service, which is an important distinction. You could
Interesting.
get like if I was drafted, I played one game and I got cut. I might be a cap hit for multiple years on a team's roster, but I'll only have one day
Hmm.
of service. So that's an important distinction. Just because you're
Mm,
accruing, just because you're a cap hit doesn't mean you're accruing days of service. Days of service are really important because they will define what type of max contract you can get. And also, days of service are really important because they will define your minimum contract, actually. And so the NBA minimum salary during the 2024 or 25 season, for a player with no experience, that salary was 1.1 million. But from there, it scales. And if you have 10 plus years of experience, your minimum salary is 3.3.
mm,
But if you are above, if you are basically above 3 years of service, you will make more than 2.2 million. So keep that number in your brain. If you're above 3.3 years of service, you'll make above $2 million. However, no matter what, after 3 years of service, your penalty against the cap will just be 2 million for the team that has you. So I could have 10 years of service, be on a minimum
uh,
contract. I will be making 3 million, but the team on my cap hit is only 2 million. And this is the
Interesting.
only way this happens. In the NBA, this is the only way that your cap hit and your salary you're making really won't match. Um, so yeah. So PJ
Huh.
Tucker, if he's on a minimum
Yes.
contract next year, he'll make 3.5 million. Whatever team that has him will be paying him,
Two.
or the cap hit against him will be 2 million. The owner is going to still be paying him 3 million, but
The cap hit is 2 million.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's
Interesting.
some important distinctions there. And that's why like sometimes certain players with more years of service might be more inclined to take an Otto Porter minimum contract on the Warriors because they're actually making like 3 million, and the mid-level exception they were going to get was 5. So in
Interesting.
theory, if I'm going to get a mid-level exception for 5 to play for a terrible team, or I can take my minimum contract for 3.5 and play for a good one, it's like and that difference it kind of evens out the playing field there. And the point of this also is to kind of give teams an incentive to re-sign older players while giving older players kind of that respect. While like
Mm,
you know I think any amount of millions of dollars is respect, right? Like no, like of course,
sure. Sure.
but a rookie will probably be grateful to make $1 million. Like an NBA vet 10 years down the line, like yeah, let's keep them in the
Okay.
league. And
Right.
that's the way the NBA looks at it. So,
It'll be
um,
interesting to see how that continues with the number of players having their careers be longer and longer and longer.
mhm.
So be curious to see if this changes or how this changes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that gives us like a good pause. I think we kind of covered all the main topics. I think now we can get into really some nitty gritty of both trade and cap concepts, or some more nitty gritty of like main trade and cap
Sure.
concepts.
Sure. Let's talk about bird rights.
Yeah, 100%. I alluded to this before. Bird rights are the amount of years that you stayed on a like it's really difficult. It's how many years you are have been on a contract or re-signed to a contract based off that contract. So if I sign to the NBA for $1 million, I get re-signed for another $1 million. I get re-signed for another $1 million. I have 3 years of bird rights. That's what they would call that. But if I signed for $1 million halfway through that season, I got traded, but then re-signed for $1 million and then re-signed for $1 million, I would still have 3 years of bird rights, despite having been traded in the middle. There was no pause in my service. There was no pause in my contract. My cap hold was always with one team.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Sure.
yeah,
Makes sense.
my cap or my cap hit was always like it was always with one team, even though I got traded. If that makes any sense, just because, like, yeah, like I never ended having a contract with a team. It's just the team traded me at some point. But that doesn't reset your bird years. That's really important. What resets
Why
your
did
bird years is hitting free agency, unrestricted.
what is the benefit of having bird ears?
So bird years allows the team to re-sign a free agent with while exceeding the cap. And so this is one of the ways you can get into the first apron, the second apron, etc. So if I have a guy for $1 million,
Uh-huh.
if I have 3 bird years, I can re-sign them to any amount. So if I have Stephen Curry playing for my team on the league minimum of $2 million, if I have bird years for him, I could just next year re-sign him to 65 million in theory, if I needed to. You know,
Mm.
so that's kind of the concept of that. So I think bird years in general, 3 years is the golden number. Derek White, for example, he was on the Spurs for a few years, got traded to the Celtics. The Celtics are re-sign him to any amount because they kept his bird years because he was traded. He wasn't signed in free agency.
Oh, that's
Boom.
awesome.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, this is super common. I mean, the Warriors traded D'Angelo Russell for Andrew Wiggins. Andrew Wiggins was on a extension. Andrew
Right.
Wiggins had played his rookie contract, had signed an extension with T-Wolves, so he had like eight years of bird years. He gets
Right.
traded, but he never hits free agency. His cap hold is always with the team, so he just maintains the bird years, and the Warriors are able to re-sign him to 25 million a year, despite being in salary cap hell at that point when they did.
So a team could trade with the Heat in the offseason for Wiggins because he's still under bird rights because he has never been a free agent.
100%. Kyle Kuzma, who's on the Bucks right now, could get re-signed to anything in theory. Because Kuzma was on a
Yeah,
rookie deal, extended with the Lakers, then got traded, extended with the Wizards, got
then got
traded. But
traded.
there was never truly like, you kind of have to find a true stop. That said, who's a really good player? Dante DiVincenzo, no bird rights.
Hmm.
Like when he was on the Warriors, I guess is the best example of this. They signed him a 1 year contract. He walked. The Warriors didn't have bird rights. They could have signed him to a league minimum, but that was it.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
yeah, um, I will say there's an important exception to this. It's called early bird rights. If you have 2 years of bird rights, um, the first year salary is limited to 175. Like you can sign an extension where the first year salary of that extension is 175% the value of the previous season salary. Um, or 105% of the average player salary for the previous salary cap year, but that's always less than 175% of the previous year's salary. So Herb Jones played 2 years on the 2 years on the Pelicans. Pelicans did some funky thing where they turned down his team option and then re-signed him to the maximum amount they could based off of early bird rights.
Mm.
And that way, they got a
Uh,
4 year contract. They didn't want Herb Jones to play out his full 4 years and then get paid 30 million a year. Instead, they ended the contract early and instantly re-signed him to a 4 year deal at a lower. Like, to be fair, in years 3 and 4 of Herb Jones's NBA career, he's making way more money than he should be
than
in years 3 and 4.
typical. Right.
Yeah, but in years 5 and 6, he
But 6, he's
might be
making one
making a lot
less.
less. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So
Uh-huh.
that's where early bird rights are really quirky. And actually, early bird rights are very important in like NBA landscape for role
So
players.
yeah, I was gonna say, so if you're like a Wemby kind of guy, you can just say, no, I'm good. I'll play out my contract.
Uh,
Like for Herb Jones, maybe he was thinking, cool, this provides me the security of getting a couple of pretty good years guaranteed. Who knows if I get hurt or something like that.
well, the
That's why
issue
he'd agree to
here
it.
is
Yeah.
that the issue the I think yes, it's guaranteed money, but the issue here is that Wemby would get offered a max contract from another team. You'd have other teams clearing cap salary space to sign Wemby to a max deal. So the thing is, if the Spurs turn down Wemby's second his option after this year, for example, if they turned it down and wanted to re-sign him to early bird, he would be limited to only 175% the value of the previous season salary, which he's making around 10 million this year. So that'd be around 17 million a year in year one of his extension. You're just gonna have another team that's just gonna pay more than that. You're just
So
gonna have teams
he's a
coming.
he's a restricted free agent in that
No,
scenario.
he's unrestricted, but like
Uh,
you're technically holding the cap hold. That's another concept. Cap holds are way too in the weeds. I'm not going to get to those today.
okay,
But
sure,
the
sure.
Spurs would technically hold his cap hold. So if they re-signed him, they would maintain his bird rights from there.
Yeah,
But a new team could just outbid them. Like if the Spurs were over the salary cap and did that, the Spurs could only offer him 17 million a year. And
I
another
see. Okay.
team, the Pistons, Or the Wizards is a great example. The Wizards would offer him 50, and the Spurs would not be able to match that. So
So
that's the thing.
this,
It's early bird
yeah,
rights. It's nothing to do with restricted or unrestricted and whatnot. Usually, when players are in the free agency pool, um, and we're talking bird rights with them or early bird rights with them, it's because the incumbent team wants to sign them to a contract, but it's because they're limited. Isaiah Hartenstein, the Knicks could only re-sign him to 20 million a year because the 175% of his previous year's salary was 20 million. So instead, he walked, went to OKC, and gave him 30
they could only pay him that. But why was he an early bird?
because he had played 2 years. He had played two years, or he played 1 year under the Nuggets contract or the Clippers contract, and then got traded to the Knicks or something. But so he had 2 years, so he had the early bird. But the
But
Knicks were over the cap, so the Knicks
um,
since the Knicks are over the cap and they have early bird, they can only offer him 20 million, but the Thunder were way under the cap. So they just came in, offered him 30 million, come home, Isaiah Hartenstein.
and his
So
contract, his Isaiah Hartenstein's initial contract in the NBA was only for 2 years to start.
no, no. Isaiah Hartenstein played many years before the last 2 years. He was on the Nuggets. He was
Oh,
on the Clippers, and yeah, no. Isaiah Hartenstein has been around the league. But Isaiah Hartenstein at some point hit free agency, signed a 2 year deal with the Clippers or whatever, got traded to the Knicks, and then that was the 2 year. Like his time clock reset at some point.
so it hurts you if you're the team that is getting that guy and he kind of pops off in a way you weren't expecting.
Yes, actually, that's a yes, yes. Actually, that's a great way to look at it applicably. Is like if I trade for a guy who's got a year and a half left on his contract and he just signed that contract, if he plays like a max player for the rest of these 2 years, unless I'm under the cap, I can't re-sign him because someone else is going to offer him way too much money. Um, a funny example of this was when GP2 had early bird options, early bird rights, and was going to leave the Warriors after they won a chip. The Blazers basically just they were under the cap or whatever. They just offered him 1 million more a year than whatever the Warriors were going to offer. They were just like,
Hmm,
here's an extra million because we can. And the Warriors are literally like fighting this ceiling. It's like Gary, we can only pay you 7 million a year. Like we literally are
yeah,
not allowed to pay you more. And Gary's like, all right, like 9 million from Portland. Um,
interesting.
so yeah, and that's why sometimes you got to think about that stuff. The thing is, like, usually you're not acquiring a player who doesn't have bird rights that ends up being really good. Like Isaiah Hartenstein is like a pretty unique circumstance, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Unbelievably unique. This helps me understand so well why the Knicks were not able to re-sign him.
Yes, and that was really difficult to understand because also in theory the Knicks might I don't know if this was something that happened, but Isaiah Hartenstein signed for what a 3 year contract. Like
With the
there's kind
Thunder?
of yeah,
Yeah.
there's kind of ways you can over like if the Knicks had come in, the Knicks could have came in and offered him 17 million, increasing by 10% every year for over 4 years. Like the Knicks could have offered him, to be clear.
Uh-huh.
Um, and maybe they did, and and it's possible. And the thing is, Isaiah Hartenstein's probably making more money in 3 years than what the Knicks could offer him over four. So,
Right. Interesting.
anyways, that's like the super nitty gritty, and that's why bird rights and early bird rights are extremely important to understand. They also tell you when a player has 10 years of bird rights, it's because they've either been on the same team forever or got traded a bunch of times and never hit free agent. Like they were too good to ever hit free agency, but have gotten traded. Paul George. Paul George has had bird rights forever. And if he had gotten signed and traded to the Warriors this offseason, they would have maintained his bird rights and could have re-signed him to any amount. But instead, once he hit restricted free agency, the Warriors can no longer sign him to anything because they hadn't traded for him. And he walks and he goes to the 76ers, which now reset his bird rights clock. Now, Paul George is only 1 year of bird rights. So, anyways.
We will have plenty of time over the off season to break this down with this updated language that I and many of our listeners are now beginning to understand better.
And yeah, and last thing, just rookie scale contracts on the Herb Jones thing. I feel like that's important. Like there's a
Sure.
certain scale teams can there's like it's basically a suggested salary. That's the way you look at it. A suggested salary from 1 to 30 based off of the salary cap. You can pay a player as little as 80% of that, or as more than as most as 120% of that. Most players sign for 120% of the rookie scale. Um, and so, yeah, but the way the rookie scale works is 2 years guaranteed. After that's a team option, and after that's a team option again. So Herb Jones played 2 years on his rookie scale. They could have just kept picking up his rookie scale option for the next 2 years,
Mm.
and then they would have had to re-sign him after that. But instead, that's why they just turned it down instantly, signed that extension, and got out of there. Um, Second rounders are a little unique. Second rounders, you can sign them to two-way contracts, you can sign them to unguaranteed, you can sign them to fully guaranteed contracts like Bronny. That discussion for a different day.
Wow.
Did we get to everything? I think
I
that's
think we
everything
did. I
on.
think the only one we didn't have was pick swaps.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do pick swaps really quick. I guess we'll
Yeah.
go back to the trade concepts a little bit more. Um, but this goes back to the picks. It you have to think about it as like the right to do something. So a pick swap is the right to I can decide whether I want to trade picks with you. Okay. So for example, way back when the Celtics, they made their big KG trade with KG and Paul Pierce. They sent them to the
Right.
Nets, and
Yep. Great trade.
yeah, fantastic trade. And so, as a part of that trade in 2017, they acquired the right to swap picks with the Nets. So, if 2017 had rolled around and the Nets had won the chip and had the 30th pick, the Celtics would have just kept their own pick, no harm, no foul. We're out. Like it's all good. Like
We're good. Yeah.
we wished you were worse, but so be it. We kept our own pick. But the Nets were terrible. And
Huh.
The Celtics, who drafted 27th, if they hadn't had a pick swap, their own pick was 27th. So they look at the Nets pick, which is first overall, and they have the rights to swap with that pick, and they say, hell yeah, I'm swapping picks with the Nets. So now the Nets had the 27th pick, and the Celtics had the first pick. From there, the Celtics traded back to get Jason Tatum. But that's kind of how they got to having that pick, despite being a top 5 team in the NBA that year. So that's why pick swaps are important. And
Yes.
for the incumbent team, like who's trading away the pick swap, it is both kind of a floor of like, oh, I'll keep my pick though. But in general, like you have to look at it as kind of like a lottery, like a big swing. And it's like, is this team going to be worse than me at that year? And the way this ends up happening is pick swaps are oftentimes on big trades where teams are combining unprotected picks. They want to trade more unprotected picks, but because of the Stipien rule, that second every other year has to be a pick swap and it can't be unprotected. So that's the way it usually happens.
That's how they get around it.
Yeah. So I'll make my 27. I'll give you my 2027 first round pick. You now have the rights to swap my 2028 first round pick. I'll also give you my 2029 first round pick. You also have the rights to swap my 2030 first round pick. That's the framework of the Paul George trade. And that's why the Thunder just had every pick forever from the Clippers. They truly didn't have 10 unprotected picks, but they just had the right to swap with the Clippers every other year that they didn't have the Clippers unprotected pick.
My
Um,
Lord.
yeah. So
All right.
and that puts you in a really tough spot, especially if you're the Clippers now. I can't be bad because if the Thunder swaps pick with me, I got the 30th pick. What am I going to do with that? It makes it a lot easier to be bad when the team that has the rights to swap with you is bad too. Because,
Right.
even if your pick ends up being a little bit better, maybe you still end up with a lottery pick.
Right.
But if you're the Nets in that situation, you
That's
just went from being
terrible.
the worst team in the league and you got the 27th pick out of it. So, anyways, that's another really important concept. And I think yeah, swaps are hard to value, and that's why I was alluding to before is that unprotected picks are always going to be more valuable than swaps. But swaps can be considered on a similar level as protected picks, depending on what the protection is, and then depending on who the swap is with.
Well, that was going to be a question before we move on because I think
Mhm.
now my brain is overrun with definitions here. But
Yes,
can you protect a swap?
in theory, yes. Like in theory, like I can give if I had all my picks just intact for the next 10 years. If you
Yeah.
We could agree to a trade Where if it was in the top 10, I keep it no matter what. But if it's outside of the top 10, you now have rights to swap our picks.
Top
That would
10 spot
total,
protected pick.
yeah. And so you kind of have to look at it as like it's like step one, was this is this pick protected? It's no longer like it is no longer protected. It fell out of the range. Okay, step two, now the team has the right to swap. And you can absolutely
Oh,
make trades.
okay. Got you. It
Yeah.
goes in that direction, not
Yeah.
the other
And you
way.
can have
Okay.
yeah, and you can look and you can make trades like that. There's no limitations to making trades
Makes
like that,
sense.
absolutely. Just in practice, it ends up being kind of difficult because you have a lot of
Mhm.
picks that are up in the air. And a lot of teams would rather have certainty of knowing where their picks are going or not going so that they can make trades based off that.
Got you.
Last concept, just really quick. Swaps also. You can do conditions where I can Anthony, I traded you my pick. You
Yep.
have the right to swap picks with me. But
Yep.
in theory, I can go to another team and say, hey, if I keep my pick, I'll send it to you for XYZ player. So the Kyle Kuzma trade, for example, the Wizards traded Kyle Kuzma to the Bucks, and the Bucks are telling the Wizards, hey, if we keep our pick in this Portland swap situation this year, we'll give it to you. But there's a chance we don't keep it. In which case we're not giving it to we can't give it to you because that's not our pick
Got you.
at the moment. So yeah.
So the potential of a better outcome was what kind of got that trade over the finish line.
Yeah, exactly. And though, because if you're the Wizards, it's like, damn, like, you know, I really hope it's not nothing, but there is a chance I just got a first round pick for Kyle Kuzma, who's been terrible all season. So, like,
I
yeah.
see.
And no one else
Okay.
was probably even offering them a chance of getting a first round pick. So if you're the Wizards, you're like that.
Okay.
So yeah.
I
And I
see.
think with that, frankly, I think with that last hour of our podcast, you can really every single trade, every single contract that happens falls under one of these categories or is implied it like has implications due to a pick swap somewhere, due to a protection somewhere, or due to bird
Mhm.
rights, player having bird rights. So hopefully that was helpful. I genuinely have nothing else on this.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Max.
Thank you for letting me
Very,
rant to you about this.
very impressive. Anything else
Before we wrap, are you?
before we
I
wrap?
got. I mean, Taylor Jenkins got fired. I thought that was
Yeah.
crazy, but things haven't been great in John Morant land. Sorry, it's not because of John Morant. I just meant Memphis is John Morant's land.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure.
Yeah. Um. But yeah, clearly things haven't been all great in Memphis, and especially since the All Star break. Um. But I have a lot of trouble blaming on a guy who's been so good at player development in light of so
Right.
many injuries on the Grizzlies. This is
Right.
their all-time winningest coach.
Yeah, that's true. Um, that'll be interesting. Um, we'll see. Their new coach seems kind of interesting. Their interim coach, what's his name? Tumas Isalo, who was like the Euro Cup coach of the year last year.
And yeah, I think the front office, I think there was probably a falling out. That's my kind of my guess because he wasn't a part of Taylor Jenkins' coaching staff last year, and the front office gutted Taylor Jenkins' coaching staff. Both people left, like if I remember, Darko, the Raptors' current
Mm,
coach. If I remember, he was in the Grizzlies system for a little bit too, for example. But yeah, like they got rid of a lot of Taylor Jenkins' coaching staff. So I imagine this wasn't totally out of the realm of possibility in their eyes, especially if they're doing it as a 56% win team. Yeah.
right. Yeah. I mean, they hadn't been playing well, but I guess it's really tough to be. I mean, 5-5 in the last 10. It's just tough to be like consistently good when your star player is out. You just have so many injury issues. So it's tough to say kind of
It's
what's
also
going on
like I
there.
think I feel like they probably felt it the way we felt it, where it's like, damn, like there's probably six better teams than the rest of them at least.
That's also probably true.
I just kind of question
Yeah.
if the first shot after that is firing Taylor Jenkins. Like I just think guys who are like that or player development coaches are that good are hard to come by.
Yeah. Damn. Too bad.
Yeah.
Better luck the next year, Grizzlies.
All
We'll
right,
see.
Peter, our resident
Our resident Grizzlies
Grizzly
fan.
fan, Shapen.
Yeah. Yeah. Hope
No,
you're
he
getting well,
literally
buddy.
sent me, dude. I sent you that screenshot. He literally sent me
Yeah,
a
it's so
page
fun.
ranting about the Grizzlies within 24 hours. Taylor Jenkins was fired, so we had sources
Damn.
on the ground.
Yeah. Nah,
Sources on
he
the
knew.
ground, baby.
He knew. Memphis knew.
He's got pull. Pull in the. He's got pull in the organization.
He's that dog.
I don't know, but
Oh
yeah.
man.
Anyways, outside of that, I don't have anything.
Nah,
This
man.
was a nitty gritty podcast, so
Yes, it
thanks for
was.
bearing with us. But it was much needed.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I guess with that, next time we hop on this pod, we're probably only going to have a few games left in the regular season. Maybe we'll have some standings more solidified and we can start doing some projections. Maybe not. We're not sure. Hopefully, we'll have a few people on coming up soon,
Yes,
potentially
sir. That's exactly what I was about to say.
around the corner. But Max, yeah, you got anything else?
No, I think we're all good. TBH.
All right, baby. Well, for those of you who celebrate March Madness, please enjoy continuing to watch. We'll be watching March Madness. We'll be watching the NBA, wrapping up this regular season. And as always, see you later on. Until then, we'll be here chilling, spitting hoops as always. Holler at you. Happy Friday.
So.